Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Tonight we are on episode 316, and we're talking a little bit about being burned out in the backwoods, the hidden mental exhaustion of bushcrafting, or just being out in the woods in general, honestly, because most people take that as a time to unplug and relax. But sometimes getting into that mindset or taking that mindset a little too far for granted, it kind of ends up having the opposite effect. You start, overthinking things, you get overstimulated by some stuff, and that's kind of what we wanted to talk about here tonight. So this was your topic, Ben. Why don't you kind of give us a lead into this and how we're going to cover it?
Yeah, and I think I'll modify the statement a little tiny bit, but it's just that if you are going through mental exhaustion, or if you're doing something that's stressful, and it doesn't have to be extremely stressful. It can be something that's minorly annoying, but building onto you over time, that has an effect. And sometimes we talk about survival. Sometimes we talk about stressful situations because we've put ourselves in those positions. And the one that comes to mind recently is I did recently do a trip, and I was very excited to get out there. I do enjoy my trips when I get to do them, and they haven't been as plentiful lately as I want them to be. And it was a motorcycle trip. We did 3 days on motorcycle. It was absolutely amazing. We seen some cool things. I had some cool conversations. I met some neat people. But during the trip, we realized that part of my bike needed maintenance. The rear brakes were acting up, and we were way back in the woods. There was nothing I could do about it. So I kind of had to drive out with 4 brakes. Fortunately, with a motorcycle, you can kind of avoid the back brakes, but it's not a perfect situation. So as I was driving out, I noticed that my mental concentration was getting a bit much. Some of the roads we were doing were close to my normal skill level, and now me constantly thinking about not using the back brake and other little minor things, I found that it was wearing on me, and more so than I wanted to admit to myself. So I was physically fine, but mentally I know my concentration was going away. And what was happening is I was starting to make more and more mistakes. I was questioning myself. My confidence went down. And this is something I've noticed more and more is that, and I've made this statement, I said, like, I ran out of skill. And that doesn't mean that I hit something that was beyond my normal skill level. It's that when you're pushing yourself to a certain level, eventually even normal things seem to get harder. So I liken this to if you were lost and you were trying to get out and you're thinking about, okay, if I don't get home, I'm going to get in trouble at work tomorrow. The wife's going to be upset. I'm going to have to drive in the dark when I get to the vehicle. All these things are going to be sitting on you. And then as you're trying to get out of this lost situation, you can make bad decisions that might bring you further away from your end destination. And what I wanted to talk about is a little bit of how to recognize this in yourself and how to deal with this.
No, and that's awesome. And I mean, the way you came into it, it's a great example and a great lead in. And I guess that's where I had some notes on some of this because I did make a few notes. I was going to talk a little bit about, some of the sources that bring this on, but you kind of covered all of them in that almost directly, honestly. I had it narrowed down to kind of 4 different things. And it was like sensory overload, decision fatigue, social stress, and the illusion of shutting off. Those are the big ones people overlook. And you kind of hit them all, you know what I mean? Just the situation you were in, it really shows how it doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't take much, but how it can be a common situation and you can get a lot of things that start overstimulating you, and that's what it came down to, was a mental fatigue by your story. And I mean, that came down to a lot of things. Like you had that sensory overload. You were thinking, you were hyper-focusing on the fact, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to be putting words in your mouth here either, but hyper-focusing on the fact that the brakes, you had to think about not using them, because folks out there, if you've never ridden a motorcycle or anything like that, it kind of becomes a subconscious use. Like you use your back brakes a lot to add stability to the motorcycle. So when you tell yourself, okay, I can't use them, you literally have to focus on that incredibly hard so you don't use them. It'd be like somebody telling you you can only blink one eye at a time. You know what I mean? Like you just do it. You blink both eyes. But if you had to sit there and individually blink your eyes, You got to focus on that, or there's, you're going to slip and blink normally, and that's exactly how the back brake thing kind of goes. And
Yeah,
not what?
no, that's exactly it, right?
And that's
Um,
the thing; it puts a heavy mental load on you. Plus, you had the
it,
social stress. You were out with a group. You know what I mean? You wanted to keep up. You didn't want to be the guy, okay, guys, we all got to go home now. Back brakes aren't going to work. It's the, okay, we can get through this, but I really got to focus up so I can do it. It adds, it's real easy to get a ton of mental exhaustion on top of you, especially, like I said, if you have to consciously breathe or blink or whatever you want to call it. Like, it's a lot of work.
well, and it was the little things that built up, and I think that's the interesting thing with mental fatigue. You don't realize the strain you may be carrying. And so, if you think about this trip, it's a camping trip. I have my camping gear. The bike is heavier than it is normally. I have a rear brake that I can't operate the way I would like to. And like you said, it's instinctual now. I've been driving for so long that I use my rear brake without ever consciously thinking about it. There's a lot of things that you've worked really hard to program your body to do that you no longer think of it. The bike is an extension of you, but all of a sudden it wasn't, because I'm aware of that. And I know, like, my back tire is probably down to the last couple of rides, and then I need to switch it out. So um, there's that. Trying to climb some of the hills, we went up some pretty steep mountains, and we came down some pretty steep mountains. On loose, some of the soil felt like silt. It was very, very fine, dusty, and then other things were hard rock with loose rock on it. That's, each of these things have their own challenges, the ways you have to operate. And I'm used to having the tail brake to stabilize. So I'm thinking about my tire, I'm thinking about my weight, I'm thinking about my brakes, I'm thinking about the trip, I'm thinking about how fast we're going. We're averaging, I think, 41 kilometers an hour at one point. I looked, and I'm like, I've got 400 kilometers to do. That means I've got 10 hours of driving. That's a long time to be on the back of the bike. And I'm thinking, if I do skid out on one of these high cliffs, am I going to survive? If I damage the bike, who could come get me? Like, it's not somewhere that you would want to bring your Honda Civic. Like, you you know, you could, but it might not be the best thing for it. So picturing all these things, like, I would definitely want, say, a four-wheel drive or an all-wheel drive vehicle rather than a two-wheel drive in some of those spots, and the time and energy. So I had all this going on in the back of my head. And then I realized when I went down that I was sort of at the limit of my skill and mental capacity, and I just needed a break. And I should have stopped 15, 20 minutes before, but it wasn't a logical place to stop. And I kind of was worried about the time. And it is really important to sort of take a look at yourself and be honest with yourself and the people with you that, yeah, I need to slow down, or I need to take a breath, or I need to stop and eat something before it becomes a problem. Unfortunately, we were fine. I mean, I dropped the bike. I had to pick it back up, but picking up a bike, which I estimate was probably close to 600 pounds, that's not an easy task.
No, 100%.
So,
Just before I forget, a few folks out here in the comments already typed it out, but I always like to give you a shout out. We got Danny joining us, we got Steve, we got Andrew, we got Eric. Everybody's hanging out in the comments there. Hope you're all having a good night there, folks. I know you're a little under the weather, Steve. Hopefully that cures up for the weekend. You get out for a roam or a drift, I guess, in your case. Yeah. Hey, gents. Yeah, it's real easy to not notice you're getting mentally overloaded. And I guess that kind of loops us into the next one there, and you're already kind of starting to talk about it. How do you recognize it, first and foremost? How do you recognize it before it becomes a problem? In retrospect, because this is a recent story for you, what do you wish you had have done differently, knowing what you know now?
step one, I wish I had done a better inspection. Like, I had gone through the bike for a lot of things. I had been near the back of the bike because I readjusted the chain. So I had loosened the axle, I had checked the chain, I had relubed the chain. I should have checked the brakes. I didn't notice them. My bad. Like, a little bit better maintenance check. I checked the oil, I checked the brakes, or I didn't check the brakes. I checked the oil, I checked the chain. I had just worked on the fuel system. I have a couple of other minor annoyances with that bike that I've been working on. I thought I had them fixed up. I have worked on the suspension a bit recently. I spent a lot of time loading it. I missed something, and that irked me because I had missed something. I probably should have spoke up a bit more, or just made the decision to split from the group and take the highway home, because the highway was a bit easier. But as we got closer, we hit um, heavy rains, so that was another stressor on the Canadian, Trans Canada Highway. We were we were averaging less speed than I was on the dirt road up in the mountains. We were doing 14 kilometers an hour when I was at least able to do 41 on these very treacherous dirt roads. And that's the average. I mean, we hit obviously higher speeds and lower speeds on there, but it was a challenge. And there's some beautiful scenery. The other thing I really kind of regret, and it's one of my things, is I, I kind of wish in some ways that I could have had a 360 camera set up, because man, I passed some beautiful scenery, and I just didn't get some of the shots I would have loved to get, the time to stop and do it. Um, but that's a me thing. Like, you have to think of the trip you're going with. But yeah, the other people, they have goals and things they want to do too. And I know the partner I went with, the camping buddy, he had really wanted to stick to the secondary roads, and I agreed with them, and we started this. And I even took a look at the maps, and it seemed like it wouldn't be too bad. But when we hit it, I was like making decisions. But then we'd gone up some pretty good cliffs and down some pretty good. And I was like, I don't want to go back and do that again. Like, I've done that.
Now forward's the only method.
Now, fortunately, where I went down, we were less than 10 minutes away from a ferry that brought me right to the Trans Canada, or to a major highway system. So it literally meant that I was able to get up and get off that, got onto the ferry, which got me to a paved road that was much higher speed, and I was able to find my comfort. And you could feel some of the stress wash off of me once I got away from it, because I didn't have to focus. Because the beauty is, on highway, I don't use brakes much at all. Like, it's pretty well, you lock your speed. If there's not too much there, you just keep going. And it's only when you're coming to a stop or if something gets ahead of you do you need to worry about brakes. But yeah, I wished a bit more maintenance. Maybe I'd spoke up earlier. Maybe I had made better plans. We had avoided a different road because I knew that road, and I knew I would probably struggle on that. I'm not sure the road we chose was any better. In fact, it may have been worse than the road that we had avoided. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing is a little bit more preparation, or a little more. When I say preparation, a little bit more of. Yeah, I guess preparation's the word I'm looking for. A little more time to look over the bike, a little more time to maybe understand what you were getting into, and then a little bit of self-reassurance. Like you said, speaking up a little bit. That's a hard one for a lot of people, honestly. Once you get into the social dynamic, it's really hard to be that person. You know what I mean? Especially when your mind is telling you, okay, this is what I should be doing. You have another side of that's going, okay, no, you're going to be that guy. You know what I mean? Let's not be that guy. This can't be that bad. And there is that fine line where you have to be like, okay, what is realistic and reasonable given this situation? And it's not always black and white. There's gray areas in there, and it's real easy to get on either side of the fence by little nudges.
And I am admittedly not the fastest driver in the world. I do not have the need for speed. So a lot of people will do the same trek that I would do at a much higher pace. I like to enjoy the view. I like to slow down and look at things. I'm not in a hurry. Plus, especially on dirt roads, of the two bikes, mine is the more road orientated of that trip. So when we're doing dirt roads and stuff, I do take things a little bit slower. I do angle that a bit more, because I do know I have the heavier weight, the slightly, probably a little more top heavy overall. So I adjust for that. And I'm not a big one on hitting turns at a ridiculous speed. I enjoy a good twisty road like everyone else, but I also don't mind taking it a little slower and enjoying the scenery. So,
and that's a big one there, is knowing your limits and staying in a reasonable comfort area. I mean, it's okay to push yourself a little bit every now and then. That's how we grow as individuals. But also knowing when not to bite off more than you can chew, especially when you're supposed to be in a relaxing environment. You know what I mean? Especially, adding more especiallys onto this, if you're already preloaded down with a bunch of cognitive thinking about tire wear, brakes, all this other stuff going on, it's real easy to get that mental exhaustion. And mental exhaustion, just like you're saying, it's you don't necessarily notice it right away, but when you do notice it, you notice that things just don't add up right. Like it is hard to put a collective thought together. I know for myself, I find myself stumbling over my thoughts. And what I mean by that is what I'm saying doesn't even, or what I'm thinking, I guess more specifically, the voice in my head, what it's telling me doesn't actually make sense to me. You know what I mean? You're like, okay, that's just absolutely ridiculous.
That's true too. The other thing you'll notice self doubt, and once you get self doubt, it can be a snowball effect. So sometimes it takes a second to just sit back, refocus, reevaluate your situation, and make some good decisions. Um, but yeah, if you start to notice that you are under a load and you are making decisions and you are starting to worry about like the final outcome, it does, it might seem counterintuitive to stop and think about your situation, but it may be the best decision you ever make. It may be a good decision to share your concerns with the people around you and make sure they understand where you're coming from. Because when you start to make decisions they may not agree with or like, at least they know why you're doing it and where you're coming from. And I feel I shared that fairly well. Like we were aware of the issues with my bike, um, and we were aware that I'm comfortable at certain speeds and I'm not going to push myself much beyond that, because I do enjoy that. But that's fine, right? But the parallel is you're lost in the woods and you're trying to find your way out. Make sure your decisions make sense. Make sure that you're in a fit position to make those decisions.
And we've often said, like, lost people don't panic. Sit down, take inventory. And that's also good once you recognize about that mental exhaustion as well. Take a mental inventory of where you're at and what are the problems. Okay, I know I'm starting to get goobered up now. Why? What is what is creating this issue? Sometimes it's just down to pure physical exhaustion, and that's a whole other thing too. You know what I mean? That can add on physical or mental fatigue. If you're just so physically exhausted that you can't mentally think, that kind of works into it as well. But if it is an emotional or a decision-driven stress or something like that, you have to take an inventory and reevaluate, much like Ben just said there. So if the problem is A, what is the best way to accomplish result B? And try to break it down and make it simple, at least until you can kind of rectify the situation you're in right now. Because you don't want to be making those shoot from the hip decisions. They tend to end up, much like Ben found out, causing issues. In Ben's instance here, it was, I'm going to say quote unquote minor issue. I mean, it wasn't really a minor issue, but in the big scheme of things to what it could have been, it was a minor issue. But in a lot of cases, it's not going to be that minor. If you're walking through the woods, you could roll an ankle. You're not paying attention to where you're putting your feet. You get it into a stump hole, something like that. You go over it. Now you've got a broken ankle in the woods. If you're trail riding like Ben was there, maybe the front tire drops down into a rut because you weren't paying attention. It tweaks sideways, and now you're going over the handlebars. Bike's coming over top of you. Like there's you can go anywhere you want with this. The thing is, your attention's divided. You no longer have the capability to try and perform everything you were trying to do at that point. So something has to give. And when potentially your life, but more specifically your own physical well-being is an element in that equation, now it's time to start backing it up and just take a second to see if you can take that element perhaps out of the equation. One less thing that could have long-lasting effects that we don't really need to handle. Safe to say?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say. I mean, I realize a lot of my limitations. I really didn't do a lot of off-road motorcycling until the later years. My previous bike, you've seen it, was a cruiser. I mean, we did some off-road with that thing, but for the most part, it was a highway bike. And most of my bikes were. So in the last couple of years, this bike's a bit more capable. I know I'm still learning a lot of how the bike's going to react. And so I'm curbing some of the stuff. The bike is capable of way more than I am. I know that. So that's just another part of the element. I think I said it earlier, you have to be very honest with yourself in your situation. It's easy to get overconfident. It's also easy to push down your self-doubt thinking, oh, you're, and not understand when it is valid. And I think there that balance of understanding um, unvalidated fear and reasonable expectations is difficult sometimes. So yes, push yourself, but push yourself in a safe way. I think I heard it said for kids, kids learn and develop best when they do dangerous play safely. And
Yeah,
it's
Mel had a big talk on that once. It's called
yeah,
Danger Play or something like that, just like you said.
but if you see kids climbing trees and you're like they could fall and break their ankle, they could, but they could also develop more skills by being allowed to do that because it's exciting and fun. And you have to do that. You have to push yourself regularly to grow and develop as a person. Don't push yourself to the point where you can't come back from it. And I was nowhere near that. I mean, my situation is not a dire, big, major thing. Um, I took a lot of safety precautions, and I was being cautious, and I still made a mistake. It was a minor mistake, and the frustrating thing is, I could do that turn when I'm not tired, not self doubting, all day long, and never have an issue. But when I was tired, I was mentally exhausted. This turn that was really not a hard turn, or not an overly challenging turn, was too much for me at that moment. And it's not that it's never been too much for me. It's not that it regularly wouldn't be too much for me. It's in that situation. It was. It's funny. I did way worse things that day that could have been much worse, and that's where I had the problem. I did feel my tires spin a few other times, and the previous day, even one of the roads felt very marbly. And you know what it's like when you're driving and the back tire just seems to be always at the
Mm.
verge of breaking traction. That's where I felt, and I was like, I'm not hitting the brakes here, and I'm definitely not hitting the throttle here. I'm just gonna drive through that. Um, but I was aware of that, and I made sure that I was aware of what I was feeling with the bike and reacting regularly to it. That's it. But it's not the only time I've been in that type of situation. Like I said, there's been a lot of times I've been in the woods where the stress level's a little bit higher because something wasn't going the way I needed it to. And you got to be conscious of that and make sure that you're adjusting for that and dealing with it. Because although, yes, generally for us, going in the woods is where we get rid of that stress, sometimes when things go wrong, your tent breaks, the weather's not cooperating, a piece of equipment is missing or broken, um, or timelines don't work out, you can get yourself into some serious trouble if you don't keep your wits about you and deal with it and use all the tools at your disposal. If there's other people, share that burden. If there's nobody around, be honest with yourself. Take that second to think about it. If you can, write it down, even if it's writing it in the dirt. What is my problem? What are my solutions?
No, 100%. I was just reading a comment from something over here, and it kind of leads into my next point I want to make too. Because on this topic, there's something I want to talk about, which is getting a little bit away from your example there, but I think you can relate to this as well, because I'm sure all of us that have been in the woods at some point had this happen. And sometimes, like you were most recently talking about there, even when you're supposed to be in paradise, you can find yourself overwhelmed. And sometimes this comes in, especially at night. And I found it happened sometimes with solo camping. You get your tent set up, you get your fire set up, you're all kicked back, ready to look at the stars, and everything's going nice. And all of a sudden, all those worries and stresses and crap that you had from, your everyday life, all of a sudden hits you right then and there. And somehow the silence of being in the woods, what you're expecting to be a paradise, makes it so much worse. And you can get into this kind of downward spiral of worrying about all these things because you don't have any buffer to stop it. At home, you get distractions. You can play on your phone, you can jump on the computer, you can watch TV. Sometimes, and I'm not trying to scare people away, but just something to keep in mind, the silence can be deafening in your own head.
Yeah.
And if you're not prepared for that, especially if you're new to camping and stuff like that, that can be very rattling. But I do promise, it gets better. You have to acknowledge it, much like what we're talking about here tonight. You have to accept it, and you do have to face your demons, so to speak. You know what I mean? Like, those feelings are not just going to disappear. If you dwell on them, they will literally make a complete mental exhaustion case out of you, not only while you're in the woods, but even once you go home, it'll make that worse. So sometimes that silence, it's a good time to sort out those feelings you never knew you had. And always expect something to creep in that you may have to think about a little bit. What's your thoughts on that, Ben? Because I'm sure you've experienced it too. You've been out in the woods
Oh,
by yourself.
I have, but the silence, I find walking is where I get that. It's a mindless task where I can punch away the miles, and if there's no one to talk around, you get lost in your own head, and that's where everything comes out. You will experience things that you would normally push aside, avoid, or whatever. But this is the time where you can embrace that. Um, it is cathartic. I think it does help you with it, but it is something that can be jarring if you're not used to that. I think I've used that method for years. But yeah, when you can quiet down everything else, and a lot of stuff in our lives probably is exactly that. It's a distraction from what's really going on in our head, and if you can't avoid that forever, so that's another good point, and it is related to this in a slightly different manner. Um, yeah, when you get to a point where you have that ability to think, uh, you don't know what's going to come up, what you're going to deal with.
And the funny story is, a lot of the times when you talk to people, and we've both had the chance to talk to individuals, but when you watch shows like Alone or Naked and Afraid or Survivor Man or Bear Grylls, or pick your TV show where somebody's hanging out in the woods by themselves with their own thoughts. If you can get them away from that and talk to them, and like I said, we both had opportunities to talk to individuals in these circumstances, that is the thing that they find out usually a couple days in, is they start thinking about things that they had completely forgotten about or never knew they wanted to think about, and they have emotional reactions in ways they never expected to have. And like both of us said, it can be slightly jarring if you are not expecting it, and sometimes it really takes you quite by surprise, because like I said, you'll think about something, think you had it all figured out in your head, and all of a sudden your brain runs rampant and it's like, oh, I never even scratched the surface of how I think or feel about this topic.
Yeah,
But that's good. That, I think, and I am not a psychologist, I think that is normal, and it is somewhat kind of healthy, giving yourself a chance to slow down and think. And as Ben was saying, and what we were saying there, is all the distractions at home, they keep you from being able to percolate on some of these ideas. And then when you have the time, man, your mind runs wild with it.
for sure. Yeah.
That's the only real thing I wanted to include on this. And what Steve was saying over here that led into this, he was saying the flies can add to stress levels when they're on. And that's a thing. That's just another thing. Recently this weekend, we did paintball for kids. The day before, I was up there helping Vic work on the neutral zone, and the flies were so bad. Like, I was putting on high strength DEET every 10 minutes just to try and keep them out of my eyes and mouth so I could focus on what I was doing. Like, I had long sleeve shirt on, long sleeve pants. They were sealed up at the arms, and I mean, you can still see I am covered in welts and bites all over my arms. Like, they were relentless. And yeah, that definitely distracted me. Like, I was up on, once again, not doing the safest things here, but we made scaffolding, and by scaffolding I mean we stood some pallets on it and threw another one on top of it. But I mean, this is a high risk thing that I probably shouldn't have been doing in the first place. Nobody go out and listen to what I'm doing. But trying to balance and swat at flies, yeah, that's a split thing there that you really shouldn't be doing. And I almost ate it. You know what I mean? Just, going like this and shook it the wrong way. And I'm only up 4 feet, but at my age, a 4 foot fall on my back might be the last time I fall on my back. You know what I mean?
Flies are one that I've experienced. I've experienced really bad flies in the past, and it can take up a lot of your mental capacity. And I think maybe that's a part of it, is you have a certain amount of mental capacity, whether you're aware of it or not. And as you start taking on additional things, so an example of this, and some people are more prone to this than others. Um, uh, Say your clothes are not comfortable. That's on your mind. That's taking bandwidth. There's a certain amount of bandwidth that's now dealing with the fact that your clothes is uncomfortable. Now you got flies biting you. A certain bit of bandwidth has gone to flies. You have something broken. There's bandwidth gone. If you think of it, you only have so much bandwidth, and if you're using up 30 or 40 or 50 or 60% of it to other crap that's not your task, you're not working at 100%, and you're going to make more and more mistakes. And it's going to exhaust you quicker. Uh, I mean, if you're a computer guy, think of it. The more apps you have running, the harder that computer has to run. If you're thinking about a car, the more things you have to tow, the harder it is to move that vehicle around and climb the hills and stuff. However you want to divide up your labor is what you're dealing with there. And flies can take, I would say, I've been in places where flies took 100% of my ability to think. If yeah, any distraction like that can build up, and it can become quite overwhelming. Um, yeah, I think that hits most of our points, though. We're close to our half an hour.
I takes a little radio, play it low. Oh, just for the noise stuff there.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I've done that. I got a little solar powered radio, and I'm not gonna lie. Some people are gonna be mad at me for this. I don't mind a little bit of music some nights as long as it's tasteful. I like classical, something low, and I can sit there and listen to it reverberate through the woods. I find it very harmonizing, and it keeps me from thinking too much about the intrinsic voices in my own brain. But sometimes I just like to sit there in the quiet, listen to nature, and listen to the embers snap off the fire and stuff like that. So I can see both sides of that coin. But yeah, I think we hit on everything there, Ben. I know I hit on the main point I wanted to, and I think you hit on the main point you wanted to. We had some good insights here. Overall, folks, it's just a mental check-in. Make sure that you're not overreaching your own mental
yeah,
capacities. Make sure you're leaving a little bandwidth for you.
yeah. Don't stretch yourself too thin. Try to understand where your situation is and deal with it, and understand that you can only process so much stuff at a time. Don't overwhelm yourself with too much stuff. You know, if you push yourself, that's where accidents will happen, and or things can get worse. Yeah, and I think I came close enough to it. I'm glad the things turned out the way that it did, and I will have those brakes completely replaced in a few weeks as soon as the parts show up. And looking forward to my next adventure. This is by no means the end of these things, but it is a wake up call on a certain things, and it's a place where I'm going to learn to concentrate some more things too. Learn from your mistakes, learn from your experiences, but get out there, do things, enjoy yourself.
Absolutely. Well, folks, I think that's it for us here tonight. Y'all have a good night, and we'll talk to you next week. See you, folks.
See ya.